still believe that the royal family is missing the Meghan magic. I know inside it was all turmoil and all the rest of it, but Meghan brought something to that role that none of the other royals could.
Just like Gloria Gordon predicted, it has happened. Let it breathe for a moment. Because that one sentence from Chris Shipp, that's not just commentary. That's not analysis. That's a confession. The UK media discovering they miss Meghan magic is the emotional equivalent of someone setting their own house on fire and then complaining about how cold it is. Think about the irony, the sheer, breathtaking irony. So here we are. After years of tantrums, pearl-clutching, headline gymnastics, and professional outrage over Prince Harry and Meghan, Duchess of Sussex, after thousands of negative articles, after relentless scrutiny, after campaigns designed to diminish and dismiss them, suddenly the tone shifts. A trip to Jordan happens. Real humanitarian work, substance, dignity, purpose, global engagement that actually means something. And now we're hearing from Chris Shipp and others in UK media admitting what many people clocked from day one. Meghan brought something to the monarchy that nobody else could replicate. And what triggered this sudden moment of clarity? What caused this narrative shift? A humanitarian trip to Jordan. Not a red carpet event, not a reality show appearance, not a dramatic tell-all interview, not scandal or controversy or family drama. Work. Real, quiet, purposeful global humanitarian engagement. The kind of visit that reminds you that true influence is not about proximity to a throne or a title. It's about proximity to people, to real work, to actual impact. When Prince Harry and Meghan stepped into those spaces in Jordan, meeting with World Central Kitchen teams coordinating food aid into Gaza, visiting addiction recovery centers, writing messages of hope to people in treatment, something shifted in the media coverage. The tone wasn't hostile. It wasn't mocking or dismissive or searching for scandal. It was reflective, almost nostalgic, tinged with something that looked suspiciously like regret. That's when you know the narrative has truly cracked. That's when you know reality is forcing its way through the constructed story. Because for years, the British press told us Meghan was disruptive, difficult, divisive, demanding. They framed her modernity as rebellion against tradition. They framed her confidence as threat to hierarchy. They framed her global appeal as competition with other royals. They framed her American directness as cultural incompatibility. They framed her race as, well, we all saw how they framed that. Every single thing about her was presented as a problem. Her family, her past career, her friends, her independence, her voice, her very existence seemed to offend certain sectors of UK media. And now, a senior royal correspondent is essentially saying on camera, actually, she had something genuinely special, something unique, something the monarchy needed and no longer has. You don't say. The vindication is almost too perfect. Let's unpack what Meghan magic really means, because it's not fairy dust, it's not mystical, it's not about being charming or photogenic, though she is both. It's strategy, it's skill, it's lived experience, it's emotional intelligence applied to public engagement. When Meghan joined the royal institution, she brought something fundamentally different. She understood modern media cycles in ways palace staff couldn't comprehend. She had navigated Hollywood, social media, global branding, and public perception as a working professional, not as someone born into institutional protection. She understood cultural currency, how to speak to multiple audiences simultaneously without alienating any of them. She understood how to connect authentically with diverse communities because she came from diverse communities herself. She had built her own brand, her own career, her own platform before ever meeting Harry. She wasn't a 19-year-old being molded by palace machinery. She was a fully formed adult professional with her own values, skills, and vision. That difference mattered enormously. She wasn't sculpted inside palace walls from adolescence. She came complete, with her own identity, her own voice, her own approach. And that terrified a system that thrives on control and predictability. Here's the supreme irony that Chris Shipp's confession inadvertently highlights. The monarchy constantly talks about modernization, about staying relevant in the 21st century, about connecting with younger, more diverse generations, about adapting to contemporary values. It's a constant refrain. We need to modernize, we need to evolve, we need to remain relevant. Then someone shows up who can actually do all of those things, who embodies modernization, who naturally connects with younger and more diverse audiences, who speaks the language of contemporary social issues. And the reaction is panic, resistance, rejection.
You cannot demand modernization and then attack the modernizers. You cannot say you want evolution and then punish anyone who doesn't fit the 1950s mold. That cognitive dissonance is what's finally becoming visible to observers, including those in UK media who participated in creating it. The Jordan trip exposed something profoundly uncomfortable for certain newsrooms and royal commentators. Harry and Meghan don't need the institution to be effective on the global stage. They don't need permission from the palace to engage internationally. They don't need royal titles waved like credentials to command attention and respect. They've created their own lane, their own platform, their own sphere of influence. And when you see them engaging internationally, confidently, purposefully, authentically, without institutional backing, it forces an uncomfortable question. What exactly was lost when they left? What did the monarchy actually lose? Because let's be brutally honest about this. There was a tangible energy shift after their departure. You could feel it in public interest levels, in the way global audiences engaged with royal news, in the cultural conversation around the monarchy. Love 'em or hate 'em, Harry and Meghan moved the needle. They generated engagement. They created conversations. They brought eyes and attention. When Chris Shipp acknowledged that none of the other royals brought what Meghan did, he's not throwing shade at William, Kate, Anne, or anyone else. He's stating observable reality. What did Meghan specifically bring that was unique? She brought intersectionality into a centuries-old institution that had been overwhelmingly white, aristocratic, and culturally homogenous. She brought American media fluency and understanding of how modern publicity and branding actually work. She brought a biracial identity into a historically white British institution, forcing conversations about race, representation, and belonging that the monarchy had never seriously confronted. She brought lived experience beyond aristocratic circles, actual work experience, actual struggle, actual navigation of systems that weren't designed to support her. She brought a different energy, a different communication style, a different approach to public engagement that felt contemporary rather than antiquated. And instead of harnessing that power, instead of saying, this is exactly what we need to connect with modern Britain and the Commonwealth, the machine turned on it. The institution rejected the very thing it claimed to want. Now, fast forward to today, to 2026, to the current landscape the monarchy is navigating. Andrew scandals continue swirling in the background, creating reputational damage the institution struggles to contain. Public debates about monarchy relevance intensify, with more people openly questioning whether hereditary privilege makes sense in modern democracy. Economic pressures mount as taxpayers question funding palaces and ceremonies during cost of living crises. Younger generations question inherited power structures more openly and vocally than any previous generation.
And suddenly, in this context, the couple who left looks less like rebels or traitors and more like early adopters of autonomy, like people who saw what was coming and made a strategic exit. The media reckoning you're witnessing right now isn't about sudden affection for Harry and Meghan. It's not about the press developing empathy or fairness. It's about narrative collapse. For years, headlines confidently predicted that Harry and Meghan would fade into obscurity, that independence would equal irrelevance, that without royal proximity and institutional support, they would struggle to command attention or maintain influence. They're finished. Nobody cares. They're desperate for attention. They'll be forgotten in 6 months. Yet here we are, years later. A humanitarian trip in Jordan generates global headlines, not because of scandal or drama or family feuds, because of service, because of work, because of substantive engagement with real issues. That's not what the predicted narrative said would happen. That's the collapse, the moment when reality refuses to cooperate with the story you've been telling. There's a fundamental difference between ceremonial presence and active engagement, and Meghan understood that difference instinctively from day one. Ceremonial presence is showing up to ribbon cuttings, smiling for photos, shaking hands and receiving lines, attending galas where you're a decoration more than participant. Active engagement is researching before visits, asking substantive questions, following up afterward, building relationships with organizations, using your platform to amplify specific issues that need attention. Meghan didn't just show up to smile and wear pretty clothes, though she did both exceptionally well. She researched, she prepared, she learned names and organizational missions. She connected personally. She asked questions that showed genuine interest and understanding. People felt that difference. When the press tried to reduce her to fashion commentary, to make every story about what she wore rather than what she said or did, audiences pushed back because they could sense the substance beneath the style.
And let's not forget Harry's role in this equation, because his choice was equally revolutionary. Harry made a decision that shook the very foundation of royal expectation and tradition. He prioritized his mental health over institutional demands. He prioritized his marriage over family hierarchy. He prioritized raising his children outside the pressure cooker environment that defined and damaged his own childhood. He chose therapy, vulnerability, and healing over the never complain, never explain stoicism that the institution demanded. That decision alone reframed massive cultural conversations about duty versus well-being, about tradition versus mental health, about inherited obligation versus personal agency. Harry didn't just leave the institution. He questioned its fundamental premises about what duty means, what family should provide, what life should look like. The Jordan trip wasn't just about meeting with aid organizations or diplomatic photo opportunities. It was deeply symbolic in multiple ways. It demonstrated that the Sussexes operate on a global humanitarian axis completely independent of palace structure and approval. That's genuinely powerful. It means influence is no longer tethered to monarchy for them. It means legacy can be built through impact and action, not through inheritance and title. It means they can engage with sensitive international situations, like coordinating food aid into Gaza, without needing palace permission or worrying about how it affects constitutional monarchy neutrality. They have freedom that working royals simply don't have. Freedom to speak clearly, to choose causes without political calculation, to take moral stances without institutional vetting. The media is wrestling with a realization, and you can see it in coverage shifts. The institution may have seriously underestimated what it lost when Harry and Meghan left. Because here's the uncomfortable mathematical reality. When Meghan was inside the royal system, headlines revolved around her constantly. Every outfit, every appearance, every gesture generated massive coverage and engagement. When she left the royal system, headlines continued to revolve around her constantly. Every move, every project, every trip still generates massive global attention.
That's not coincidence. That's not random. That's not because UK media is obsessed. That's magnetism. That's star power. That's cultural influence. And magnetism cannot be manufactured through tradition alone. You can't create it through protocol or ceremony or inherited titles. Either someone has it or they don't. Meghan has it. Now, let's talk about Chris Shipp's casual mention that inside it was all turmoil during Meghan's time as a working royal. Interesting how that's suddenly being acknowledged now, isn't it? The chaos that was previously dismissed as exaggeration or lies, the tension that was denied or minimized, the difficulties that Meghan described and was called a liar for describing. Now it's casually confirmed. Oh yeah, inside it was all turmoil. History tends to soften its edges and acknowledge uncomfortable truths once the people involved are no longer perceived as threatening the hierarchy. Now that Harry and Meghan are gone, now that they're building independent lives, now that they're not disrupting the institutional narrative from within, suddenly it becomes safe to admit, yeah, it was really difficult. Yeah, there were serious problems. Where was that acknowledgement when it might have mattered, when it might have led to support or change? The Jordan visit reminded global audiences of something simple but powerful. Harry and Meghan look at ease now, purposeful, in sync, focused, genuinely happy. There's no visible strain of trying to conform to protocols designed centuries ago. There's no visible shrinking or dimming of personality. There's no tight smiles masking discomfort. They look like people doing work that matters to them in ways that align with their values without having to constantly navigate institutional politics.
When people see that contrast between their constrained appearances as working royals and their ease now, they draw their own conclusions. The British media may not state it directly, but the subtext is impossible to miss. The monarchy's modern chapter could have looked radically different if the institution had fully embraced what Meghan represented instead of resisting her at every turn. Here's a fundamental truth about power and influence in 2026. Relevance is not inherited. It's earned daily through visibility, authentic connection, transparency, and engagement with issues people actually care about. Harry and Meghan understand digital ecosystems. They understand international audiences. They understand how narratives form and spread in the social media age. They understand the power of direct communication versus filtered institutional messaging. The palace still operates in many ways like it's 1952. Protocol unchanged, communication strategies outdated, relationship with press stuck in old models. That tension between institutional tradition and contemporary communication reality was never going to resolve quietly or smoothly. So when Chris Shipp talks about missing Meghan magic, he's really acknowledging a massive generational and operational gap. You cannot demand modernization while rejecting everyone who actually understands how to operate in modern media and cultural landscapes. So when we play that Chris Shipp clip acknowledging what the monarchy lost, let it sit, let it breathe, because it captures a genuine turning point in media narrative. Not an apology, we're not there yet and may never be. Not a surrender, the attacks haven't stopped entirely, but recognition. Grudging, reluctant, partial recognition. Recognition that Meghan magic was never the problem. The inability to embrace it was the problem. The institutional resistance to change, to diversity, to new approaches, to different voices. That was always the problem. And now the world is watching the aftermath of that failure. Harry and Meghan are thriving independently, building impact, commanding attention, shaping discourse. Meanwhile, the monarchy that rejected them is struggling with relevance, struggling with public trust, struggling to connect with younger and more diverse audiences. The very things Meghan could have helped with. That's the story. That's the arc. That's the fire. And UK media is finally, reluctantly, starting to admit it.
Thanks for watching, family. If this resonated with you, subscribe for more honest analysis. Let's keep celebrating their success and calling out the narrative shifts. Until next time, stay joyous, stay informed, and keep watching the receipts pile up. I'll see you in the next one.